Hello, and welcome to the Gang Culture Podcast, a series educating you about gang culture. This season, we hope to expand on the lived experiences of gang and street life, explore further research surrounding the appeal of gangs, all while bringing together an array of unique voices to inspire, empower, and cause change. Whether you are listening at home, school, or on the way to work, we hope you enjoy and learn something that can be shared with others. Welcome to another edition of Gang Culture. I'm your host, Ellis Rouse, and I'm joined today by special guest, John F. Scaduto. Hey, John, how you doing?
Great, Ellis, and how about you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you very much. Can't wait to have this conversation with you.
Great, thank you.
So my first question for you is, can you just tell us how you first became involved in investigating gangs?
Of course. When I started my career, I was a part-time police officer and also worked in the correctional system. At the time, I was on the tactical unit, and many of the disturbances that we were having were a direct result of gang activity inside the correctional facilities. So, like anything else, you need to know your enemy, and that's how I really got immersed into the gang culture, into the correctional facilities. And the gangs just don't operate in the correctional facilities; they also operate anywhere where people are, in great metropolitan areas and suburbs. We'll talk later on about how they're right now using exotic islands as narcotic transportation ports, to go around where people assume where most of the narcotics are coming in by international routes. So wherever there's folks and people, there are gangs, because of the gang culture that has, if we're into sociological terms, it's no longer a counterculture, because many parts of it have been immersed into our daily culture.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. So over the over your 40 plus year career, how has the landscape of gangs changed?
It's like everything else. I go back to when we were really involved in spreading the word about gang activity. In the late 80s, early 90s, there were many areas of the United States where law enforcement could not use the G word. People were in a strong denial that there were sophisticated gangs operating within their municipalities slash jurisdictions, because the terminology of gangs, it was a term that not only did politicians not wish to use, but some law enforcement professionals who really, I hate to say it, turned a blind eye to a lot of things and just wanted to, be Mayberry RFD, so to speak, and didn't want to realize that this was, in fact, a problem within their jurisdiction. It didn't necessarily mean that they failed. It's just that it began permeating. So in the same term, going back using the term networking in the 90s, well, not only did we do it in law enforcement, the gangs did it, and the gangs actually did it better than we did initially. So from there, it went on to utilize the exact format that we're on: computers, social media, apps on the phones for communicating. And you said 40 plus years. I learn every day. The day you stop learning is the day you become irrelevant. Because if I knew everything else, no offense, I probably wouldn't be here. I would be somewhere in a palace and all knowing, and maybe the Wizard of Oz. But we law enforcement have always been playing catch up, because we have other things to do. We have to take care of basic needs for services, for calls for service, many of which are not gang or violence related calls. Now we're dealing with a lack of recruits coming in the field, experience walking out the door. So the catch up now we're playing in this moment of time is personnel. So they have plenty of personnel, and they have a constant supply of, on their side, new recruits. When we walk into the area of outlaw motorcycle gangs, at least a decade ago, we were looking at the new recruits coming into the motorcycle world, gang world, because that's what they are, the organizations. And you could kind of make a cross reference, and I don't mean this to be insulting, but they almost look like the new law enforcement officers. They're in top shape. Their haircuts are high and tights. No more, even when I train senior officers, they assume that they're, they got a bigger belly than me, and they're all wearing beards and hair likened to ZZ Top, and that's not the case at all. And they go through the same indoctrination processes and screening processes as law enforcement. Many of the major gangs really have their prospects go through a formal private investigator background check. I have some of the forms for street gangs as well as motorcycle gangs that is as thick as an application for you to be a member of a law enforcement agency. And many of the major gangs will polygraph their prospects as well. So that's where I use a comparison. So we're dealing with someone that, when I was 18, 19 years old, I was chomping at the bit to become a police officer, and would go through the academy. And when I went, there was a sleepover. So, you're running from 5 in the morning till 5 at night, and you gladly went through it because that was part of the process, as well as being on probation and et cetera. Well, if you look at the motorcycle clubs, they have a probationary period. They have a prospecting time. They obtain seniority rank. Well, it's, again, I don't want to use it as a parody, but there are some similarities when I train new law enforcement officers. And they're striving to be number one, like you're striving to be number one. You're striving to get that promotion. They're striving it as well, except they're doing it in a different way, which could cause us great harm if we get in their way.
Wow. Wow. It's really a organization.
Yes, these are multi-million, at very least, international corporations.
Wow. It's interesting you put it that way. So you are mostly here to discuss OMGs, outlaw motorcycle gangs. So what inspired you to investigate that particular gang?
I had always worked all aspects of gangs activity in my initial career in Massachusetts, um, being attached to various task force, whether it be local. My last 3 years in Massachusetts, I was in charge of the ICE program with Homeland Security, but we also operated on the street with the Violent Gang Task Force, roaming all over New England, and my deputies are in New York and New Jersey. Um, Biker gangs traverse through state lines, international lines. Many of the major clubs that we're encountering, even down here in Florida now, are international clubs. So it's an interesting, challenging business. When I come down here from Massachusetts, Florida had to deal with the Outlaws Motorcycle Gang, because pretty much that was the main club in Florida. Well, in the past 5, 7 years, we've got clubs and motorcycle gangs that originate from your neck of the woods, my neck of the woods, all over the place. So that little expertise really propelled me to being a trainer, or at least a knowledge source for many of the guys and gals down here in Florida. So I really focused my attention on the last same thing, 5, 7 years, on biker gangs, even though I did work in a street gang unit, and our day-to-day problematic gangs were more of what's called a hybrid gang. Not the traditional Bloods and Crips, but homegrown, sometime crossing race lines, etc., and ripe with violence. So when you have a small unit, again, resources, do you try to tackle the long-term cases, such as an outlaw motorcycle gang case, will need? Or do you have to address the immediate needs of violence in the community? And you have to address the immediate need. So going back, that's pretty much how I got focused into the motorcycle clubs, and now being semi-retired, we're active here. That's through the Florida Gang Investigators Association. That's where I've been honing most of my time.
Wow. So you did talk about how the gangs are organized and a bit of that structure. Could you talk about that a little bit more? How they typically it's structured?
Yes. Um, where we're talking motorcycle clubs, gangs, um, several of the bigger ones have an international structure. So they will actually have nationwide boards, presidents. They will be kicked down to regions. So we'll just use the United States, for example, and I'll use, say, the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels have their hierarchy, which up until a couple of years ago was a gentleman by the name of Sonny Barger. He was looked at as the international leader of the club. He's one of the founding guys out of California. Um, Underneath him, um, the Hells Angels, there's the East Coast club members and the West Coast club members. They have their officer meetings. Each state, each region could also have a leader. But the leadership is really focused in on the chapters. So we look at, say, Massachusetts. They have about 6 or 7 active chapters of the Hells Angels. Each of those chapters have a president. Each of those chapters have a vice president, a sergeant at arms, a treasurer. And again, those offices are replicated up to the national leadership. So there is an identified hierarchy. Even there's a case where there's a guy. He's almost 7 feet tall. He was the president of the Las Vegas chapter of the Hells Angels. His nickname was Pee Wee. He's all over media now, and he's literally. I think Pee Wee was about 400 pounds, 6'9". Again, a rock of a man, and the treachery permeated even someone as like him, who was looked at as a really at least a West Coast leader of the club, and they ganged up and they took him out. They removed him from his presidency. Whether you believe him or not, on some trumped up charge because he was gaining too much power. There's always that political play going on in these clubs. So we have hierarchy, and because that's what they do. They're kind of treacherous. Many are criminals, not all. We'll get that right out. There are a lot of them that don't have any criminal records, but they have a way about them. So instead of getting fired, Pee Wee wound up getting thrown out of the club. I think he did some time in prison, and now he's doing the same thing as another semi-famous Hells Angel, George Gus Christie. He's all over the place in movies, talk shows. He at one time he was Sonny Barger's second in command for the country. He had such a prominent role. He actually carried, I think it was the '88 Olympics. He carried the torch for the United States Olympics during this section representing the Hells Angels. His son, who has passed away, was a chapter sergeant at arms, and his daughter, at one point, who was an attorney, I believe, still in California, exclusively represented the Hells Angels. So it was a true family affair. He got into some sort of difficulties with the club, left the club, and as he says, he's just telling a story. Well, he's been telling that story now for about 3 or 4 years, and exposing a lot of incidents involving the Hells Angels, and he's still walking around, which could lead into another fallacy when you talk about the mafia and bikers, informants, their lives aren't worth a nickel. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club has a saying, snitches get stitches. The Hells Angels have 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead. Well, a lot of that stuff doesn't happen anymore. I mean, you've got major mafia people that have come out. They're on TV all the time. Where I'm from, Boston, they asked me about Whitey Bulger. His top hitman, John Martorano, who did a couple of years, and I think he's got probably a dozen murders under his belt. He's out and he's walking the streets of Boston today, and no one has taken him out yet. So, going back to the original question of structure, they are structured, but the structure could be fractured real easily based upon internal rivalry, let alone outside. Because if I have a president of the Pagans Motorcycle Club, again, a national club, and they want to take out a president of the rival team, say the Hells Angels, they will also affect the structure by taking out a president. That's a significant move to take out a president, vice president, or a national officer from another club. So those, again, to answer any questions, they are structured. We could go on, infinitum about the structures, how it can be easily fractured. Each club has their own little, whether it be a tab or a patch that they wear indicating the rank. The Mongols actually have a different way to identify their club officers. It's a bar. So there's all little idiosyncrasies where the clubs will show membership and then the subsequent rank and position.
Wow. Wow. So how does that differ from other criminal organizations?
You have leaders in other gangs. Go back to the local hybrid gang. Many of them are Haitian descent, so they will take a lot of the Haitian guidelines that they use in Haiti here, where you'll have an identified leader, but a lot of times the leadership roles will change based upon what they're going to do. It's almost that, you have expertise in gun running, I have expertise in narcotics trafficking, say. So for today, we're going to take a load of guns and we're going to hustle them over to Miami from Naples. Give you an example. And so today I'm running that show. So when we looked at the couple of gangs in our area, our region actually down here, because they just didn't stay in Collier County, that's where I was in the gang unit. They traversed to Lee County, which is Fort Myers, Miami Dade area, Fort Lauderdale. So they're regional, and the leadership will change. You look at the Bloods and Crips; they have their set leaders. Latin Kings will have leaders that are memorialized in writing. They're great cases to work because they leave all of their leadership stuff out because the new members, the prospects, have to literally memorize so many things that they need cheat notes. Those cheat notes are what we find law enforcement, whether it be in the correctional facilities or out on the street executing a search warrant, traffic stop. We've been fortunate down here. We found a gold covered manifesto for the Latin Kings in adjoining county in Hendry County. Well, we're still utilizing that. That's a treasure trove of information that can be used in criminal proceedings throughout the country. So it's some of them are pretty structured, and some of them are loose structured. The more loose structured gangs are more of a problematic approach to dismantle, because if you take one or two of their members out, it's just no big deal. Where if you take the leadership out in some of these gangs, you can set them back quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm familiar with the Bloods. I'm from Brooklyn. I grew up
Okay.
in an area where the Bloods, they pretty much dominated that area.
Yeah.
So
And then you
I'm
had a
very
deal.
familiar.
Are they street bloods or are they UBN
UBN.
prison blood?
Yeah. UBN.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it came from Rikers Island. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the street law enforcement officers and the people out there that, want to enter this field, the prison gangs are actually more stable because the leadership is already incarcerated. You look at the Aryan Brotherhood, long-term super gangs like the Mexican Mafia. Most of the leadership is what they refer to as being buried alive in some of these ultra maximum security prisons. They still affect ways to get the message out and still call the shots. So those are harder organizations to really you make a dent. You see newspaper headlines where 10 indicted for murders and this, that, and the other thing. And I had an inmate in Walpole say something once and never forget it. You can only do life once. So if you give somebody 15 life sentences, okay, not us, we're here, but it's a whole different culture, a whole different way of thinking. And even me, I grew up in the city. I wasn't a terrorist, but I was no innocent kid. But boy, when I got exposed to that stuff, talk about a culture shock.
Yeah. Yeah. So, are there particular regions in the U.S. where OMGs are most active?
Probably going back 15, 20 years ago, you could say yes, but now every part of the country is in play. Puerto Rico is in play. Many sections of Canada are in play. Uh, the Caribbean is in play for a number of reasons. With biker gangs, that if there are any older law enforcement officers out there, even older biker gang guys that have since left, they would be local. They'd make a run could be from, say, look at the Mongols. They were pretty much West Coast. So the entire state of California, go up to Oregon, Washington. Now we've got Mongols chapters here in Florida. They're in Jersey. So there are gangs, as I said, 5, 10 years ago, strictly regulated to the East Coast. The pagans in your neck of the woods, in North Atlantic states, there was always a group of pagans living down here in Florida visiting, but they really weren't organized. But now they're literally all over the place. So there's very few places that can say and be truthful, and that's the thing, truthful, that they have no outlaw motorcycle gang activity. Because just because you don't see them does not mean that they're there or not there.
Right. And are they made up of older or younger people?
There's a mixture. When you look at a biker gang club, and I'll use the Hells Angels, they kind of set the trend for some of the patches, the slangs, the mannerisms. So like we do a lot of classes down here in Florida, and we've heard that many times. Why are they why is Mr. Scaduto focusing on the Hells Angels? And you have to let them know that the Hells Angels really started a lot of the stuff, and the patches, the sayings, the way to expand. Sonny Barger, though he's dead, he did make a statement decades ago, and he's right. He said, "When I'm done, the sun will never set on a Hells Angels patch." He had world visions decades ago, and they've come to fruition. So um, they're they're all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. So could you explain the significance of the patches, colors, and symbols within these gangs?
You could probably do a day on each club. So we'll pretty much just talk about the back of the club jacket. The terms are vest, cut, colors, rags. Um, the Mongols have a Spanish term for them. But bottom line, when regular folks like us, we're driving around and we see whether it be one or we see a pack, we always remember that back of the jacket. So the basic terminology is on the top of the jacket would be the club name, whether it be the Hells Angels, Pagans, Mongols, Sons of Silence, Devil's Disciples, Wheels of Souls, etc. There's hundreds of them. Some that are significant national clubs, some that are international clubs, and some that are more regional. Um, so then when you look at the center patch, that's pretty much the moniker of the club. Many of the big clubs, that center moniker has a name. So for the Hells Angels, it's the Death Head. The reason why we use the Hells Angels is because they've perfected it. That death head, most people don't realize, is patented and trademarked. They have been successful in suing Disney, Marvel Comics. They actually had an episode of Cake Boss going back probably about 9, 10 years ago, where they showed the cake people baking a cake for a newer chapter in New Jersey, I believe. Yes, it was Jersey, where the cake had the death head on it. And they actually showed the letter from the chapter president authorizing the cake people to bake that cake. So that would be the center patch. So we look at a death head for that. And just to give you a little example on how the Hells Angels have really made the mark, so to speak, in the biker world. But when you look at, say, the Vagos, that's Loci. When you look at the pagans, that would be the Norse god of fire. And he has his own um, moniker where they actually got it from a Marvel comic book type of character that they utilize for that. And I'll think of his name when we talk about it. The Outlaws, the skull with the cross pistons, he's known as Charlie. The center patch of the Mongols, he's fashioned after Genghis Khan. And they're on the third generation now of the Mongols patch. So they all have their little idiosyncrasies for the center patch. When you look at the bottom patch, that's where a lot of trouble starts and major wars have started. The bottom patch is generally known as the territory patch, or where they're from. So these clubs, when they started, and again, I have to utilize the Hells Angels, they felt that they were the only ones that could put a full state spelled out on the bottom rock. So I'll take Massachusetts for an example. Hells Angels had Massachusetts fully spelled out. So it's a very long underneath, but that's their territory patch. All of the other clubs, you would see MA, you would see MASS, you would see Boston, you'd see Metro West, you'd see Cape Ann, for different sections of Massachusetts, not spelling out Massachusetts on the bottom rocker, because at that point in time, the Hells Angels did control not only Massachusetts, but pretty much New England. So whether you went to New Hampshire, Maine for the Slaughterhouse crew, the Connecticut group, they had their full state bottom rocker. When the club started to expand in other areas, like the Outlaws, they initially used other clubs to garner their way in the state. And then when they popped up, and we'll talk about that later on about puppet clubs and duck clubs. So the Outlaws announced on a website, because at the time I was really investigating biker gangs throughout New England, and they had put on their website Outlaws, Charlie, and underneath Massachusetts. Well, that alone spurred a number of shootings. They opened the clubhouse in the city of Brockton, Massachusetts, and every night it was taking gunfire from the rival team, whether they be Hells Angels affiliates, etc. The problem with that is that just behind that clubhouse, which was fortified with the steel that they put down on the road for construction, behind it was a church. And unfortunately, many of the errant rounds hit the church because it wasn't a residential area. So there was a couple of homicides, stabbings throughout the state. There was a chase that actually started in New Hampshire. On the road, a rolling gun battle came into Massachusetts. There was gunfire in the city of Braintree, and then in the town of Weymouth, they actually had a member of the Hells Angels run over, and kill a member of the Devil's Disciples, which was fronting with the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. Some sort of a truce was worked out, and I actually have the photographs of the new club colors or cuts, as I said, the term. Instead of Massachusetts underneath, it just read Boston. So in kind of a deference, okay, well, we're going to come in here, but we'll just put Boston. And I believe that truce lasted a year, if that long. before there was some little problem, some minor thing that escalated, and F you, they put Massachusetts, and it's been on ever since up there. And generally, when those types of incidents happen, because both of those clubs are international, that will trigger a problem, at least nationally, but most of the time internationally as well. Because, well, you're messing up here, and they're my brothers in Boston. So me and you are doing business down here, and say, where they're both from, say Montana. That's a different state. Not that they're both in there, but we're on opposite sides. Some it's war, and right now you've got you got problems in New England involving the Outlaws still, but right now the Pagans are moving in again to an area that was always traditionally Hell's Angels, and that's a very active, violent war going on. Pretty much focused Rhode Island and southern Massachusetts, but there's been incidents. And law enforcement maybe gets alerted of probably 20% of the conflicts because they'll take care of it themselves, just like a lot of gang activity. There's an incident that happened over the weekend in Georgia. There's 2 dead. There may be another one dead, but 2 are in the hospital. They're in critical condition, and that's all biker gang related. That's all I can tell you at this point in time. But the only reason why law enforcement knows about it is because people started showing up at the hospital with major gunshot wounds. And when you find a couple of bodies at a site, that's probably going to bring law enforcement in the heat. I hate to be joking about it, but that's how we know. But there's many times that, and this goes directly back to the patches, they will have a violent incident. We won't know about it, but then we will see John Scaduto. He's a member of the Breed Motorcycle Club, and we photographed John last week in his front of the cuts or the flash. He didn't have a violence patch. John's got a violent patch this week. So something happened. John just can't buy a violence patch and put it on him. That patch has to be awarded by the club, and that has to be witnessed. So obviously something happened we don't know about yet.
Wow.
So that's pretty much the back of the jacket. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, yeah, that's great. That you explain that. Do you have any interesting stories that pertain to OMGs? Any crazy encounters?
There's so many stories out there. Even the believable ones are hard to believe. There was the one on my neck of the woods. There was a gentleman that had, during an incident with the Hells Angels, I believe it took place on Revere Beach, he cut, and again, trophies are big to these guys. So if me and you get into a fight with rival clubs, you beat me up. It's not enough to beat me up. If you can take my motorcycle jacket, which is my prized possession, that's a big deal. And if you can't, even if you slice part of a patch off or something, they're trophies. And we'll see the smaller patches actually worn on the inside. They used to wear them on the outside of the jacket, but now they become more subtle because obviously law enforcement knows something happened, but they're also putting themselves out there for a mark for the other club. But a lot of them will have it on the inside of the jacket. And I'm not telling you anything secret for the members that are out there. Yeah, we've known about it for years. They will put those little mementos, souvenirs, and most of them you see the threads cut because they're cut off, and they're on the inside of their jacket. Some full cuts, colors are hanging up on clubhouses. But in this particular incident, a death head was cut off of a Hell's Angel. So the story goes, the gentleman passes away through an act of violence. He's buried in a New Hampshire cemetery, and the story goes about 4 months after, the caretakers for the cemetery come in, and they see that this person's grave has been severely disturbed, aka dug up. When he was buried, he wore his motorcycle jacket as his death costume, so to speak. because the members will have elaborate funerals. Um, and to pause on that one, there was a funeral of a Hell's Angel in the city of Lynn, Massachusetts, where the member was paraded around the city in a horse-drawn carriage and tied up the city of Lynn for about 3 hours. And he was a very prominent Hell's Angel. There were Hell's Angels from all over the world attended that funeral. So going back to the New Hampshire story, the caretaker come in, and the gentleman was, what was left of him was there. The vest was there, the motorcycle vest. What was missing? The death head that he had cut off a Hell's Angels jacket, put on his jacket. They dug up the grave and took the death head back.
Wow.
Another one, I'm very familiar with the case. I'm very familiar with a family member. Member of the Outlaws passes away, a long-term member, and I didn't know this. Probably other investigators knew it. That's why I said you learn every day. And the club paid for the funeral. So since the club paid for the funeral, they pretty much dictate how the funeral went. And the day before burial, they allegedly took the dead member in the casket from the funeral home to the clubhouse to have a last drink with him. You figure out what happened from there.
My God. Wow.
Yeah, so yeah.
Wow,
But
that's crazy.
but going back to that, you'd ask me about membership. You see a lot of these guys. It is very difficult to stay being a full patch member of one of these major clubs. It's a full-time job. It costs a lot of money, a lot of time. So the same thing we tell our new officers, when you look at a member of a major club and you see they've got, and some of them will actually have the big memory patch, or the anniversary patch, or a pin. You see somebody wearing, pin, they've been around 10 years, 15 years. Yeah, they may be overweight and look out of shape. They're no pushover. They're an apex predator. They have survived in that world. If they're wearing, say, even a 5-year pin, 5-year anniversary patch, they've been around that club for probably almost a decade. And they've had to do a lot of things to maintain membership and maintain membership in good standing, because you'll see some of those guys will get kicked down back to prospect if they mess up. So that's going back to the patches. So when you see somebody with an anniversary patch, it's, you're dealing with someone that they're professional biker, because a lot of these guys come and go because they tell you, I just couldn't keep up with it, or they mess up, they're in jail. But when you see the ones on the street, anniversary patches, they're serious bikers.
Wow. Wow. What would you say is some of the biggest challenges law enforcement face when dealing with OMGs?
They're long-term cases. It's organized crime. So, like right now, there's the media is all a buzz, politicians all a buzz about the transnational gangs, which I've been working transnational gangs. When you work gangs, whether you realize or not, you're working transnational, but that's the term. So when you have members of these clubs, the Mongols, the Vagos, they have major chapters in Mexico. An outlaw in Florida has a direct tie to the cartels in Mexico and has had it for over a decade. This isn't new stuff. It's new because now, and that's a disservice that we do, law enforcement, and maybe the government. The government should tell people what's really going on. Everything isn't, nice and la la land and, horseshoes and, you know what I mean, candy canes. And it's no different in my vacation area in Naples, Florida. I was with the gang unit. We got called out for every stabbing and shooting incident in the county, because most of the time it was related to people that we knew. Plus the guys in the gang unit, we're used to dealing with violent people. So we know how to keep our calm. We're not new jacks. And there would be many a times I'd be gone for several hours. and come back and be a shooting, sometimes a public shooting. Zero on the news. No crime in Naples. It's everywhere. It's not just here, but just to give a real example where I can give you dates and times. And um, so that's problem one. The transnational stuff, not new, been going on. It will continue to go on. There's too much money involved. Um, the problem's also staffing, gang units, major street crime units. Whether people like to hear it or not, it's confrontational policing. So if you don't want any complaints, because these people will complain. I mean, I had people complain because I yelled at them. No, one's got a homicide we were trying to prove. I yelled at him. So he calls the department, and before it changed, like, some departments will do an internal affairs on you. So you start wondering, what are we doing here? And then the newer officers come in and they go, do I really want to deal with that BS? And they don't. I'm dead up serious. And it's like a lot of stuff, the old term, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. Well, we occasionally use some bad words to talk to these people, but that's the language of the street. And then the other thing, and I don't mind having cameras, law enforcement. When I was on patrol, I had the camera in the cruiser, no problems. But when you look at gang units, intelligence units, a lot of bikers talk to me. I keep my in Massachusetts County. I keep my word, because you got to give them an out. There's been a couple of guys I've shepherded out of the clubs. They're not even in the state of Florida anymore, because they realize they're in it too deep, and it's a two-way street. We help them get out, and in turn, they give us intelligence, and a lot of stuff we already know. They verify it. But when you have a body camera, they can't talk to you. They get killed. When we deal with these people, the Hells Angels, in fact, they have it's like a reverse field interview. Where police officers do a field interview. Heard of that term? Well, they have the same thing. They have to tell their hierarchy that they had interaction with law enforcement. Why? They don't want to be seen as a snitch, because they can't talk to the police. And they're always suspect of someone being an informant, as I said, going back to new members taking the polygraph. They don't want to be infiltrated. So, and I use that in a term. He's no longer, but there was a guy who was friends with the sergeant at arms. He's in charge of discipline. We had a relationship, not that he was an informant, but we both knew how to get what we wanted. We did not want to see those colors in our area. They're there. You can't stop people from riding, and you can't stop them just for wearing the colors, because contrary to what most people think, it's not illegal to be a gang member. You can be documented and fit all the criterion. It's not illegal. But they also know that it's bad for business, especially in tourist areas. And we had that understanding. But again, when we're talking, there's nothing on me. He can record me. I'm not saying anything bad or whatever. But when they see that camera, he's got a pretty good idea. I'm not going to say anything. Who else is seeing that footage? Because we recruit from the human race. Is every police officer honest and forthright? Do they maintain a level of confidence that's required? The answer is no. So that's another dilemma that we have going. But I think the biggest one is the idea of confrontational policing, which is a fact of life, because you're interfering in their business. And part of it is that you cannot allow them to take over turf jurisdiction. I hate to talk like them, but if you live in the community, you have the unfettered right to go anywhere in your community. If they take over a corner, a street, major gangs, an apartment complex, you can't go in there as a member of the community and pity the people that live in the community under that threat of violence. Are they going to be like cordial when I go in there and try to kick them out? or mess up their business? I can tell you for a fact, absolutely not. And a lot of agencies don't want to deal with that. The other thing with the bikers, since we're talking about bikers, those cases are long-term cases. Good friend of mine, and again, there are so many people that work bikers and gangs, but there's probably only about maybe 0.2% of us that are able to talk at this point, because I'm semi-retired. I don't have to maintain a level of secrecy as to my identity. But I can tell you right now, many of the things that I'm speaking about, there are many, many brave men and women in law enforcement that do it on a day out, day in basis. Not only in the United States, I'm in communication with people in other countries. They're the real people that investigate the gangs. I'm just a face telling you some items. So, and I always want to make that I'm no way am I an expert. I kind of don't like that term, but there's an awful lot of people behind it. But going back to those cases, so he will get called into a police department. They figure out they have to do something, and after he gives his spiel, whether it be a sheriff or a chief, and sometimes the mayor will be there, the politicians, and he says, oh, it could be maybe 3 or 4, and they're going, weeks? No. Months? No. Years. And we're going to need federal partners, because the minutia to, say, follow a member of a biker club, I have to be able to get a ticket immediately and jump on an airplane. And the purchasing policies alone in some municipalities, that just can't happen. They don't even have the vehicle to reimburse some of their people. So that's why a lot of times you get the federal people involved, so you can get an open-ended credit card. And if you have somebody that's undercover, they can operate that way. Other than that, you're not going to work them. And you're also going to need somebody that can provide jurisdictional powers to your people on the task force, because you're not only going to leave your city or town or state, you're going to be traversing throughout the country. Following.
Wow.
So they're not easy cases to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
That's just encapsulating a little bit of your question too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how do OMGs impact local communities?
That's the same thing. It's organized crime. So like when you have that explosion of violence in a public area, we just had one that brought a tremendous amount of heat on the clubs. Daytona Bike Week was a couple of weeks ago, and in a municipality about an hour, 45 minutes away from the Daytona meet, two major clubs will have a exchange, and that's all it takes is even a bad look, that type of bravado. And one club was severely outnumbered. That's one of the MOs too. And the physical altercation quickly went into gunshots, with a number of people at the gas station, as well as it adjoining two major state roads. So that's where it definitely impacts the public on a daily basis, whether it's bringing narcotics into your community, prostitution, adult entertainment businesses. All of those things are still factors. They can't deny it. It's in court records. Um, and a lot of people will go, oh, you mean the nice people that own that house? They work on cars? Well, yeah, but have you gone in and maybe there's 15 stolen cars or stolen motorcycle parts being worked on? Because in the case in Georgia that I spoke about, that was the hub. They had a motorcycle gathering at a place that's usually fixes motorcycles and cars. And what I can tell you is between 150 and 200 enthusiasts attended, which again resulted in at least 2 dead people, probably at least be 3, and a number of other injuries. And skullduggery took place there that we will find out soon, I would imagine. So those are the threats that bring in the community. It's not just this nice group of people that go for bike rides. And the culture, we've got two-pronged approach on the culture. how the biker club started was after World War II. A lot of people come back for camaraderie and everything else, and they banded together. Well, we've been in a war footing for what, over a decade? And many of the club members that I've interacted with down here um, were veterans. There was one veteran. He was a member of a puppet club, so he was part of a club that actually is controlled by the Outlaws. He's on a full disability for psychological issues, but he brought a lot of knowledge for his military unit to the club. Well, he only trusted the gang cops because we had a rapport with them. So one day he has a bad experience and he holds himself hostage, armed, and this is during the daytime. One of the most gang guys work nighttime, so we're all sleeping. And my partner Adam gets woken up, and he was on call, and he said, "Hey, we got a guy. He's holding himself up in the house. Wants to talk to a gang cop." And Adam went there, and Adam talked them out. It's kind of like they have this rapport because maybe they think we understand. Well, we got to understand because we got to work with you, not that we agree. Um, so that's a lot of the stuff. So we're seeing that come about again with the military facet and the training and the camaraderie. The other thing we're seeing because of the Sons of Anarchy stuff um, on TV constantly. Got a lot of people, a lot more people. They think it's cool. You see people wearing Sons of Anarchy motorcycle gang jackets, where true motorcycle gang guys know it's not real gang, but it's that culture, as I mentioned earlier. But I took a photograph when I was in Universal at the Terminator ride. And when you come out of the Terminator ride, they have all kinds of cool stuff. And there was a little section that I took a photograph of, and it had Sons of Anarchy biker stuff and shirts for children. So again, all of this stuff manifests itself. Not everyone will wind up being part of the Mongols Motorcycle Club, but nonetheless, it's feeding the interest. And coupled with you have a number of enthusiasts. Some are law enforcement officers that join law enforcement officers' motorcycle clubs. And I'm sad to say, it's hard to tell whether they're a true outlaw motorcycle club or a cop club because how they present themselves with funny patches and territorial patches and nicknames such as Bash or Hammer on the jacket. It presents a bad image, and I know there's some people that will disagree with me, and I'm not saying that they're all bad, but we have a problem, the gang cops, when we talk to the bikers and they go, you know, we don't dress up like you. Why do you guys dress up like us? And you have to kind of go, yeah, they make a point. I mean, I'm not walking around, on my days off with like, chains and I don't see a lot of motorcycle gang members on their off days walking around, thinking they're, you know, Dick Tracy or Hawaii 5 with badges around. So they make a point, and like it or not, that's from their perspective. So those we're up against a number of issues in dealing with them, and as a result, that's why they're throughout the country. So you can pretty much corral them up a little bit, make a couple of cases, but there's no way that we're gonna make a serious dent in them, at least from my point of view.
So, in saying that, what do you think can be done to combat the influence of OMGs?
Public exposure, maybe. Um, I think people have become numb to so many things. I just said earlier, we don't give enough information to the public to educate them. But on the flip side, will they trust the information? Do they even care? Well, they don't bother me. It's no different growing up, in Boston, and you talk about people you knew they were in organized crime, but back then they go, what was the saying? They won't bother you. They keep the area quiet. The identical thing. We work a biker clubhouse, and most of the time the neighbors they, they tell us to leave. They keep things quiet around here, or they'll hire some of the local. There was a Cape Cod clubhouse for the Hells Angels. They were hiring a couple of neighbors to do painting and everything else. What they were really doing is they were buying human security because the neighbors would let them know, hey, there was a black Crown Vic driving around, and Black Crown Vic Ford is a cop car, and they would give them a heads up. So I'm really not sure to stem off to publicize the violence that they perpetrate is absolute. It's like anything else. If you bring sun out to something and show everything, um, maybe, I don't have all the answers on that, Elliot. I wish I could, write a prescription for it, but I don't know, because we're dealing with the law enforcement. We're dealing with a myriad of issues. Um, and then we have issues with our own people coming in the field as to whether, like, a lot of people don't want to work gangs. They're a little intimidated. So I don't know where we go. And I've seen it where we grab the guy. Ever heard of the term ghost guns? The guns that can't be traced, et cetera. It's a very big topic of law enforcement here in the public.
Yeah.
Well, me and a partner had a guy down here in Florida. This is at least 10 years ago. And we caught him doing something, and he wanted to trade. And at the time, he was building ghost guns before people even heard of ghost guns. So they take it to the higher ups, because we're definitely going to need help working this case. And I come in that afternoon. Tom and Ron, the sergeant, went to a meeting and come back, and I'm chomping at the bit. How the meeting going? And I knew something was up, because Ron just had this big smirk on his face, and they pretty much said, "Well, it's kind of dangerous." And I started laughing. I go, "Dangerous? We're the police. If not us, who?" So that case never got worked out. So, and that ergo goes back to motorcycle clubs. A lot of law enforcement administrators don't want to get involved with work on biker gangs. Just pass them off. Let's let them go on their way. It's terrible for the members of the general public that, don't want to hear that. I can tell you right now, it's the truth.
Wow. So, final question. Do you have a message for our listeners?
Well, if you don't listen to your mom and dad, or you can get a good enough rap on the butt once in a while, I don't know what I could do. But bottom line is that, a lot of these people prey upon you at your most vulnerable time, whether it be biker gangs. We've seen a couple of members where we watched. There's one guy, and he just got out of federal prison doing 35 years, but he was a athletic star, no problems at all, and then became very interested in the biker world. And we were training the Massachusetts Department of Correction, because all the agencies up in New England wanted their agencies trained on biker gangs when we had a Hells Angels World Run in New Hampshire in the mid 90s. And this one employee come up, and she told me the guy's name. I says, "Oh yeah, I know. He's just involved in an armed robbery to get his patch, because he had to commit a felony." And she gave me blow by blow on how he fully transformed from being, good pupil athlete to so fanatical about the biker club that they really became his new family, and totally turned his back on his blood family. And in the end, as I said, he just got out of federal prison. You have Latin Kings, because all of this is public. They will their application is 6, 7 pages deep, including how they want their funeral carried out, including list of relatives. And why do you think they want your list of relatives? Because in 2 or 3 years, when you find out it's maybe not for you, part of the influence that they will say, no, you can leave, but hold on a second. Your niece and nephew that live in Hartford, Connecticut, on Fifth Street, you still love them? How do you think they'd feel if we pay them a visit? It's too late. And as I said, two of the Outlaw Club members down here that I've shepherded them out. One guy looked me dead in the eye. He said, "Mr. Scaduto, I knew you guys were around us for a reason, because they seen it as harassment, but he come to full understanding, why are the resources being spent on being around these people? Because that's how bad they were. You got involved in them going to 2 other counties and destroying a bar. A gun was pulled. Thankfully, no one got shot. And there was some other stuff going on. And he said, I had no idea what I was getting myself involved with. And he was a member for over a year. They were slowly getting him in to where he couldn't leave. And he made it difficult. He liquidated everything down here and he's in a totally different state. We didn't press him for too much information, but it's a two-way street. I got to help you. You got to help me, because we had expensive resources. But yeah, you know, it's the truth. You'll see very few people at the top make all the money, maybe avoid prison time, and you're just a pawn. And it's up to you whether you be a pawn or you be your own man or woman and go about life. And we're not all millionaires, and everything isn't, as I said, rainbows and unicorns and everything else. Life is hard, but doing 30 years in federal prison because you want to be part of this group, I'd rather do 20 years at a job and get a pension and go for pizza once a week. That's just me.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So, John, thank you for your wealth of knowledge on this topic. Really appreciate you joining us today.
No, I appreciate it. I know I tend to bounce around so much because with all the decades, there's so much stuff racking around in that gray head of mine. But again, there's an awful lot. So when you have people come in and say that they're an expert, Elliot, I really okay. Yeah, but I appreciate it. If we can turn one person um, to not get involved in this lifestyle, then we've done more than what we could ever have hoped for. And if we could educate some of the people that see these guys when around Christmas time they're doing Toys for Tots runs, or I love it when like the Hells Angels does a blood run. It's kind of like an oxymoron. Are they getting blood for the hospital, or are they going to spill some blood on the back of an axe handle? I don't know. Just saying. But they defend them. And yeah, well, they're doing that in a very public way. Why do you think? To garner your attention so that they look very well in the public eye, in the public forum. They do all kinds of stuff to garner that attention. You don't see when they're not wearing their colors and they're destroying a bar because they didn't pay protection. Or as a case of in Manchester, New Hampshire, which was a well-documented incident. They had a member of the Outlaws be a silent owner in a pizza store, and a gentleman walked in wearing a Support Your Hells Angels t-shirt. He was not a member of the Hells Angels. He was just wearing a silly t-shirt, and he got murdered. So,
wow.
There are many things that are out there open source. Don't have to believe me. Look them up for yourself. But again, I appreciate the time. And if you think you need a follow-up, feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you a lot, John. We hope you found this episode informative. I look forward to continuing the conversation next week on gang culture. Stay tuned as we dive into an enlightening conversation with our guests.